In the heart of New York City, near Washington Square, in 1911, March winds were cold and bare. A fire broke out in a building 10 stories high, and 146 young girls in those flames did die. Ballad of the Triangle Fire by Ruth Rubin, 1968. The late 1800s through the early 1900s were the Industrial Revolution, known for its switch from farms to factories that would change the world as we've known it forever. Desperate immigrants looking to make a new life in America would do anything for money. By 1900, roughly 1.7 million children under the age of 16 worked in factories. Irving Babbitt, a leader in the movement of literary criticism, says, "The Industrial Revolution has tended to produce everywhere great urban masses that seem to be increasingly careless of ethnical standards." As workers got paid very little and were required to work 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, factories turned to sweatshops. In 1890, a new load of immigrants came to America and were hired into these sweatshops. They became among the lowest paid Americans. With little government regulations, there were little to no building codes or fire inspections. In 1900, industrial accidents killed 35,000 workers per year and disabled 500,000. Then, on September 27, 1909, Jake Klein, a Triangle Shirtwaist factory employee, went to his boss and asked for a raise in his group. The boss replied, "Get back to the machines." 5 minutes later, 2 thugs came and told him to leave. Jake Klein refused and was grabbed by the neck and dragged to the door. There, he was continuously slapped. He looked out to the workers and yelled to them, "People, workers, look at what they are doing to us. Get up from your machines." Hundreds of workers followed Jake into the street. The uprising of 20,000 began. Thousands of sweatshop workers from all over New York joined in this protest as, on November 22nd, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union called a general strike. Picket lines were formed outside factories. These strikers were often beaten, fined, and sent to jail. The Women's Trade Union League, which contained citizens from the middle and upper class, helped bail out protesters from jail to continue the strike. Besides their efforts, by December 25th, 25,723 had been arrested and fined. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union continued to negotiate and sign contracts with 354 shirtwaist companies that promised improvements. This was a big win for sweatshop workers across New York. However, the Triangle Shirtwaist Company did not budge. Instead of discussing terms, they just hired new workers, called strikebreakers or scabs, and kept the same operation. It was the Triangle Shirtwaist Company's responsibility to make enough shirtwaists to stay in business. The demand for this popular button-down blouse was high. However, at the same time, it was the employees' right to a safe work environment. The employers decided to sacrifice the workers' right to a safe work environment in order to fulfill their responsibility to make enough product. Due to this decision, there were no fire safety precautions put in place. Workers were stuffed in crowded rooms that were filled with flammable fabric, sewing oil, thread, and dust. These conditions were begging for a fire.
It was a day that was bursting with life, a day full of the first breaths of spring, and fate ruled that on this day 146 young lives should be snuffed out in a terrible manner. They were destroyed by the horrible Triangle Fire.
Mary Domsky, Triangle Shirtwaist factory worker. On the 8th floor on March 25, 1911, at approximately 4:45 p.m., workers at the Triangle Shirtwaist factory were finishing up for the day. Suddenly, in the southeast corner of the room, a burning cloth was lit. The fire spread quickly. It was attempted to be put out with 27 buckets of water that were used as fire extinguishers. When that didn't work, a call was made to the upper floors, but no one answered. An alarm went off as fire stations were notified. The elevator was sent up to help the evacuation. After only a couple trips, due to the excessive heat, the elevator stopped working. Some tried to haul in a hose, but it was rotted. As panic set in, workers flung themselves down the elevator shaft, dripping blood and coins on those who had made it inside. There was one fire escape, but it collapsed once weight was added. The doors had been sealed and bolted to reduce stealing.
We never went out the front door. We always went one by one out the back. There was a man there searching because people were afraid we would take something, so the doors were always locked.
Pauline Cuapio Pepe, Triangle Shirtwaist factory worker. Most workers were young Jewish or Italian immigrants who didn't even speak the same language. As fire companies 72 and 33 finally arrived on scene, there was not much they could do. Their ladders and water could only reach up to the 7th floor. Many chose to jump. They tied rags around their eyes and jumped in groups of 5. With their clothes and hair ablaze, they hung off the windowsills. Firefighters put out safety nets, but they failed as they ripped under the weight.
Those bodies were coming down with the force of 1.5 tons by the time they hit the sidewalk. They were coming down with hair and clothes burning. You know, the girls at that time wore long hair. When the bodies didn't crash through the dead lights, they lay there on the sidewalk 3 or 4 high, burning, and we had to play the hoses on them.
Frank Rubino, fire department captain. Within 15 minutes, it was over. Most of the workers from the 8th and 10th floors found a way out and survived. However, almost everyone from the 9th floor died. The fire gave no mercy. 146 were left dead, and the rest of the 500 employees were left to suffer with traumatizing memories.
The floods of water from the firemen's hose that ran into the gutter were actually stained red with blood. I looked upon the heap of dead bodies, and I remembered these girls were the shirtwaist makers. I remembered their great strike of the last year, in which these same girls had demanded more sanitary conditions and more safety precautions in the shops. These dead bodies were the answer.
United Press reporter William G. Shepard, witness. Word got out on the fire. Newspapers took over the stands.
More than 140 die as flames sweep through 3 stories of factory building in Washington Place.
142 die when Shirtwaist factory burns.
April 5th, many victims were buried. During this time, 500,000 spectators watched 100,000 working men and women march up Fifth Avenue in Lower Manhattan, showing respect for the lives that were lost. Citizens were infuriated that owners Max Blank and Isaac Harris lived and their loved ones didn't. A joint relief committee was formed of citizens who wanted to support the families of the victims, and alone they administered close to $30,000. As the dead were identified and funerals celebrated life, Max Blank and Isaac Harris went to court. They claimed their factory was fireproof and had been approved by the Department of Buildings. On December 27th, they were found not guilty at the trial and were acquitted. Public was beyond mad. Finally, on March 11, 1914, 3 years after the fire, Max and Isaac paid $75 per life cost. After all the expenses were paid, they profited $64,950 from insurance and stocks. Several days after the fire, the company opened up a new factory that still had non-proper exits and lacked fire escapes. Perhaps the person with the biggest role in the changes of the Industrial Revolution was Senator Robert F. Wagner, as he was one of the 3 that headed the Factory Commission of 1911. He was also the author of the Wagner Act, in which he gave workers the right to a strike and a union. This act was signed into law by President Franklin Roosevelt in 1935. In addition, protective labor legislation was put into place, applying strict safety changes, including employers' liability, workers' compensation, workday and workweek laws, occupational disease and comfort laws, and industry-specific health and safety laws for mining, railroading, and construction. The Industrial Revolution took advantage of possible good qualities, and the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory was an example of this, while the fire was a consequence. However, together, the United States came to balance out the rights and responsibilities so that the Industrial Revolution could continue in a positive way.
I really can't tell you but how the fire started. But I know it started on the 8th floor and it spread rapidly to the 8th floor, and I can tell you that much, that if the 9th floor, if the door on the 9th floor would have been open, I think most of the people would have been safe.